Welcome to Elasmocast. Today we have a really cool episode. We are going to be talking about ontogeny of the great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias, with Emily Hunt. How are you doing?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
I'm doing really good. I'm really excited for this topic. I think the viewers are really going to enjoy it because who doesn't love the white sharks, you know?
Doesn't. They're so charismatic. Who doesn't love a white shark?
Exactly. And before we get started with the science, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? What got you into studying sharks?
Yeah, it's really funny actually. So growing up, my mum was like deathly afraid of sharks, like terrified of them. So I always kind of had this negative perception of them. And then it wasn't until I started diving and kind of seeing them pretty frequently, I was like, oh, they're pretty chill. So it kind of sparked my interest into them. And then obviously studying my bachelor's, I always had a really big interest in kind of the fisheries side of everything. And yeah, sharks are just fascinating creatures. Like physiologically, they're amazing. They kind of like sit at this intersection between like ecology, conservation, public perception. Yeah, so they're just like this charismatic animal that's hard not to be fascinated with. So that kind of like sparked my interest and got me into the shark side of things. And then now I'm doing my PhD, and it's mainly like in the broader sense focused on foraging ecology and predator-prey relationships. So within that, mainly looking at diet stuff, I kind of started doing stomach content analysis and nutritional ecology, and I was like, ah, yeah, this is my thing. And then kind of linking in the broader sense to predator-prey relationships through the function of the actual body parts and their morphology and how that links to feeding. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now.
And what about white sharks in particular got you fascinated with them?
They're just a really cool animal to study because they occupy such different niches throughout their lifetime. They have like these really like prominent shifts, not just in like their habitat use, but also, their body shape and that kind of thing, which I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, a juvenile white shark isn't just, a smaller version of an adult white shark. They're almost, completely separate like animals ecologically. So we have juveniles that, they tend to be more coastal species. They have a completely different diet to mature animals. And then, as they grow, their priority kind of shifts from survival and growth to reproduction. So then they're, exploiting these offshore habitats and starting to incorporate marine mammals into their diet. So yeah, there's this really cool ecological shift that happens in the species. So it's a really cool animal to actually study because, yeah, it's important not just as a keystone species in the ecosystem, but yeah, for conservation, you really need to be studying, different um, size ranges to understand the animal. So yeah, I don't know. It's a really, really cool animal.
Yeah, and a lot of people I think perceive sharks as being essentially born as a mini-me to the adults.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
the more you like look at it with like a fine tooth comb, it's not so much the case.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we'll be talking about it throughout the episode. So to clear up a couple terms, what is ontogeny and how does that relate to what you're currently researching?
Yeah, so ontogeny is pretty much how an animal changes throughout its life. So it could be like as they grow, their body parts change or their diet changes. So it's just kind of anything that incorporates the transitions throughout different life stages in the broad sense.
Yeah, and let's talk about what some of those changes are because in your first paper that you released, you
Mhm.
discussed some of these ontogenetic shifts that happen throughout the life cycle of a great white shark. So what walk me through what some of those changes you found are.
Yeah, so obviously, it's very well known that they have dietary shifts as they grow. So, they start incorporating marine mammals as they got older. So, in my first publication, we were kind of looking at if the body shape actually changes. So, using morphometry to do that. It was really interesting. I wasn't expecting to find much. I actually did the project as a little internship, and then yeah, it turned into something a lot bigger because we had been collecting these historic measurements. There was like 54 measurements per shark. So yeah, so much data to get through and so much that you could manipulate and do with it. But yeah, we found that as they grow, their pectoral fins become kind of relative to their body length, shorter and like narrower. And we linked this with their ability to like their hydrodynamics, so being able to swim a lot faster and propel through the water. So when they're juveniles, going back to their ecology, they're kind of usually swimming just casually. They don't really need to target fast and hard-moving prey like a seal. They're mainly eating fish and squid. So they have longer and broader fins to kind of help produce lift. If you think about like an aeroplane taking off, the water pushes against their fins and it gives them lift. And this is mainly because the lipids in their liver, they don't really have as many. So yeah, as they get older, the lipids in the liver increase. And because oil is less dense than water, they float. And it produces buoyancy, kind of like, in a BCD, you float up. But yeah, because the juveniles don't really have these lipids, they will tend to actually sink to the floor. So as they swim, this lift is produced through their pectoral fins, which is really interesting. And then similarly with the fins, their caudal fin or their tail becomes broader and longer as they get older. And it's kind of, this iconic lunate shape that we know. It's like that symmetrical shape. When they're younger, it's a little bit more asymmetrical. And then it, yeah, grows and gets thicker as they get older. And that's to actually help produce those rapid bursts of speed that we see when they're hunting. So I always kind of link it with fins if you're like a diver. Like boogie boarders have those really short kind of broader fins, and it's to produce, those rapid, like fast movements, and that's more similar to the mature animals compared to like if you're a free diver and you have those really long fins for cruising slower. Yeah, that's more evident in the juveniles, which is really cool.
And how do these changes affect other sharks comparatively? Like, is the great white special in this regard, or are there a bunch of other sharks that do a similar thing throughout their growth cycles?
Yeah. Great question. I don't think it hasn't really been looked at in many other species. Like morphology has definitely been looked at across different taxa, but it's mainly looking at conversions between different length measures, but not in the sense of kind of throughout ontogeny. But there has been documented cases of like the head shape changing in different species, and yeah, that caudal fin changing in tiger sharks, and helps them, um, perform these like long offshore migrations. So I think it's, yeah, definitely evident across taxa. I just don't think it's necessarily been looked at such a fine scale.
Yeah, and it's
So,
interesting too, like when you think about the great white, a lot of people might think that it's been studied to death because it's the quintessential shark. But it's
yeah,
crazy that things like this, is just now being really looked at in depth. So there really
yeah,
is a ton of research that's still left to do.
definitely. Yeah, there's so much out there to study. I feel like morphology isn't, everybody's top pick of something to look at, but it's crazy. It really links in with everything. Like it's so interconnected with ecology and foraging. Morphology really constrains their ecology. Body shape really determines and like, their capabilities as an animal. So, to really understand their, function in an ecosystem, you really need to study all aspects of it. So yeah, there's definitely so much more to do with it.
Yeah, and could you explain the concepts of allometry and isometry and how that plays a role in your great white
Yeah.
research?
Yeah, so that's kind of like the crux of everything in morphology. So isometry just means it's kind of like a linear increase. So like a 1-to-1 unit increase. So if body length increases, well, doubles in size, then you'd expect their fin to double in size and stay relative to their body. But allometry, on the other hand, is the opposite of that. So you can either have positive or negative allometry, and that means they're not scaling proportionately. So that's how we found the differences in the fin shape. So there was like negative allometry with the caudal fin, meaning that it's shorter relative to their body as they get older throughout their ontogeny. So it's kind of like the mechanism for understanding how these changes occur and like quantifying the changes. But yeah, in the yeah,
Mhm.
easy rundown version of it.
Yeah, no, that's good. And when we're looking at the ecology, you've touched on it, but how does the ecology really shift as the sharks wind up changing their body plans? Do they have different like adaptive techniques when they predate, when they scale up, or is it mostly just going to be a dietary shift that you see happening?
Yeah, there's so many shifts. Like they tend to do these offshore migrations as they mature. They're in these really inshore coastal nurseries when they're younger, at least on the east coast of Australia. So it's not just diet. I think diet is such a big role. Like, obviously, as I just said, morphology actually explains what they're capable of doing. But yeah, their um, dietary preferences, we see this shift, but it all comes down to their nutrition that kind of drives these decisions and drives these migrations. So yeah, that's the main changes is like habitat use and diet. Yeah.
So, what do you think causes these shifts to occur? Like, do you think it's because they get in a certain amount of nutrients, or do you think it's more something that just goes back genetically throughout deep
Mhm.
time? What do you think
Yeah,
that?
there's definitely like the evolutionary side of things. Like they've evolved to suit these environments and evolved to be able to eat, marine mammals and have the capability of hunting, these larger, faster moving prey. But yeah, I think it really, that's what my PhD is really kind of looking at is right down to the nutrition level of things. And yeah, it's really interesting the patterns. You kind of think that sharks will just eat whatever they can, and it's all like resource availability that drives these decisions. But we've it's been demonstrated across a whole range of like terrestrial taxa and other species that it's not actually what's available. It's like comes down to tiny little nutritional cues that drive these decisions. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint what exactly drives these changes. But yeah, I think it's like a big mix of things that all have like a really connected interplay between each other.
Yeah, and it's very sharks in general as well as their relatives. They're very complex. Like you'll see certain batoids or rays that shift their dentition seasonally, which is
Yeah,
crazy to think
wow.
about.
No way.
Yeah, so you see a bunch of different stuff happening, and on the topic of teeth, your latest
Yeah.
paper discusses that. So let's talk about what you found in your latest paper with great white shark teeth.
Yeah, so again, similar concept. We were kind of trying to look at how the shape changes throughout their ontogeny. So these dietary shifts are well known, and they kind of start incorporating mammals into their diet at around 2.5 meters. So, like thinking about it, you'd be like, obviously, there's got to be changes functionally to their morphology to assist them with being able to capture these prey. Otherwise, they'd be eating them from a younger age because if you think about energetic demand, marine mammals have such a high caloric density. So, like, it would be really optimal for their growth to be consuming them when they're younger, unless they don't actually have the capability to do so throughout their morphology. So, that's where the kind of idea and the aims came from was seeing, is there actually a change? And then we're also trying to see if there was a change in the dentition throughout the jaw as well. So if you think about our teeth, our anterior teeth, we have our incisors and canines, they have a different function to our molars. So we want to see if there's like a similar kind of function within the jaw as well, in their teeth. So yeah, that was kind of our aims of the study. And then we were using two separate methods. So elliptical fourier analysis is this new method that's kind of come out. So we're using classic morphometrics, which is just taking measurements to kind of validate it. So there was so many measurements. We took six per tooth to try and actually quantify the shape. And then for the elliptical Fourier analysis, you take a photo of each tooth. So yeah, we were just looking at the functional row, which is like the first teeth within a file of the jaw. And if one was kind of like damaged or absent, we could just use the secondary tooth in the file because you assume them to be equivalent because they have a really, really fast turnover rate, which you're very familiar with. Um, but yeah, so trying to see how the shape actually changes. And there was like a really, really distinct change at around that same 2.5 meter mark. It was like a little bit before they get to that. So that kind of tells us that the shape of their teeth is actually changing to be able to assist with capturing these bigger, harder moving prey, faster moving prey, harder and faster moving prey. There we go. Got there. Um, yeah, so like the thickness at the base of the teeth, yeah, increases dramatically relative to their body size. So, obviously a bigger shark is going to have bigger teeth. We know that, but that's why we're using, the allometry and isometry to show how it changes relative, so the actual proportional changes. So, yeah, the teeth kind of transition from this like small, narrow cuspidate teeth with they're like quite unserrated and smooth. And that's mainly to reflect them hunting like fish and slimy prey and kind of like being able to retain them. So the function of those teeth is mainly like puncturing and piercing prey. Whereas then this kind of shifts as they get older and they get these really broad, triangular, serrated teeth. And that function is more for like shearing and cutting. So if you've ever seen like videos of them, even tiger sharks actually, eating any like whales that have washed up or and they kind of do this like shake with their head. It's like a knife and fork, like shearing and cutting that way. So yeah, they have like a different function of feeding as they get older as well. So yeah, just everything changes as they go, which is really interesting. And then throughout the jaw, there was a change in the shape of the tooth. At around the sixth or seventh tooth, they become a little bit more recurved for kind of retaining prey. So yeah, it was interesting because just looking at a jaw, you wouldn't kind of notice these nuanced little changes. But yeah, when you look at it on a larger scale and have like so many jaws that you can look at it throughout ontogeny and throughout the jaw, you can actually quantify these tiny little changes and it really reflects their ecology, which is really cool.
Yeah, and one thing that I've heard be talked about, as well as I believe I've said it too, is that the juvenile teeth possess atavistic characteristics, but that might not necessarily actually be the case. In that when you look at the teeth, like you said, they're partially unserrated for especially the newborn ones. And then if you go back in time, you can say, well, these Carcharodon hubli teeth, they have a similar type of characteristic, in which case it kind of blurs the line, especially if you're looking at juvenile teeth where the shark kind of transitioned out. But then if you look at the cusplets on them, I believe those cusplets are actually derived serrations compared to them being like a true lateral cusplet, like what you see in, say, the relatives, the salmon shark or porbeagle shark.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's really interesting seeing that because when you go back in time, say if we're in the Miocene, when Megalodon was around, great whites and they wouldn't have been like the true great white, but you would have had their ancestor like Carcharodon histalis. Their
yeah,
juveniles also have these lateral cusplets on them, which is
yeah,
it's really cool because those I don't think would be a derived serration because there were no serrations at the time for them. And then
yeah.
go back even further, their ancestors, like the genus Macrorhizotus, they will have lateral cusplets in the earliest instances. So you can
Yeah.
kind of tell that like the lateral cusplets is the plesiomorphic characteristic. because these
Yeah.
would have been like you found like fish eaters mostly. And then as
Yeah.
they slowly transition out, not only ontogenetically, but throughout time, they become more and more mammal oriented with their
Hmm.
dentitions.
Yeah. So interesting. Yeah, and because even like we found that a lot of the juveniles have those lateral cusplets and they kind of lose them at around the same point they start incorporating mammals. So yeah, it just shows that it kind of is really used for retaining those slimy kind of fish and squid.
It's really cool too because when you think about that, you see that change and then it loses that throughout the shark's life. But then if you
Mhm.
look at other shark lineages, like if you look at the megalodon lineage, for example, you have these teeth with lateral cusplets all throughout the evolution, even when they serrate and clearly enlarge and become more marine mammal centric, they still
Yeah.
retain those lateral cusplets up
Yeah.
until you get to megalodon functionally. And then with
Yeah.
Megalodon, you might see some juveniles with them. But an interesting characteristic that I've noticed and other people have too is that the juvenile teeth of Megalodon, called like the Hubble morphology, they are
Yeah.
very, very robust, broad, and triangular,
Yeah. Yeah.
indicating that they were eating marine mammals like straight from the.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's so cool. Wow. Because do you have enough records to be able to look at ontogeny
So
throughout? Yeah.
it's difficult to do that because we're looking at isolated teeth for the most part.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
you're going to be going based on like stratigraphic context and things like that and possibly with stable isotopes. But yeah, when you combine the morphology with that, you can pretty clearly see that this would have been an animal at its earliest stages that would have had a similar niche to what full-grown adult great whites have, which could indicate differences that could have led to megalodon's demise, for example, when you
Yeah.
start seeing these great whites fill in niches more experienced than a slower, especially as of Shimada et al. 2025, Megalodon body plan. So it's
Yeah.
things are like starting to piece together, and it's really
Yeah,
cool.
that's cool. Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah, I never thought of that. I didn't realize that. Or like you always just think of Megalodon, like that iconic tooth shape. But yeah, really interesting that it kind of represents that they were foraging on the same thing throughout their whole life. So cool.
Yeah, and for people that don't know, Megalodon used to be hypothesized to have been a Carcharodon, like within the same genus as a great white, and if not the ancestor to great white, because they have similar broad style teeth. But
Mhm.
when you look at it with a fine-tooth comb, like you have that burlette, you have clearly these serrations and that shape evolved independently, but that's because they're both marine mammal oriented predators. So like
Yeah.
you expect things to become similar.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's really cool. And let's talk a little bit more about tooth morphology and what different morphologies function for different prey sources.
Yeah, so kind of already touched on it a little bit, but the actual morphology of teeth, it's so distinct and it really represents a species' dietary preferences. So, when you get the really like pointy cuspidate teeth, usually with the lateral cusplets, they're usually feeding on fish and squid and, have this piscivorous diet. Whereas, the broadly serrated, like we just said, are more marine mammals. So, that function changes from that piercing and gripping to like shearing and cutting. But then you also have teeth like in the Port Jackson shark, which are more malariform teeth. And they usually are feeding on crustaceans. So it's used for like grinding, like if you think about our back teeth. So yeah, it's really interesting. You can kind of just pinpoint what a species is capable of eating and usually what their dietary preferences are just from looking at their teeth. So, yeah, it's really crazy to be able to look across all these different taxa and know where they kind of fit trophically and what they're feeding on just based on the morphology of their teeth. Yeah, really interesting.
And it's cool too because a lot of these cutting morphologies, like the great white, they originate from more of a tearing morphology, and it
Mm.
just becomes more and more. I guess, specialized for that type of prey source. Like it doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily start out like that. Like you get the unserrated teeth, but then they evolve the serrations. And what's
yeah,
cool with lamniforms, the mackerel sharks in particular, is you can see multiple lineages, like the evolutionary transition
yeah,
between them, which is so rare in the fossil record to begin
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's so cool. Like you think about like short fin mako teeth, they're, completely different to a white shark and, they're pelagic species, but their whole life they're mainly feeding on fish and squid, that kind of thing. So yeah, they just retain this kind of cuspidate shape their whole life, even though they're in the same family as great whites. It's yeah, interesting. And then you compare it to like other pelagic species like, an oceanic whitetip. The in the same kind of broader niche as like the makos, but they have these really broad serrated teeth similar to a great white or a bull shark on their upper jaw. And, they're these scavengers and opportunistic feeders. So it just, yeah, highlights that they are also feeding on marine mammals, even though they're in that same kind of habitat, which is really cool.
And I think one of the most interesting questions you think about is what comes first, the
Mm.
morphology or the behavior?
Yeah, it's so difficult to pinpoint because obviously like evolution, um, you know, changes to the environment then cause that change to occur in the actual body. But vice versa, the morphology actually kind of hinders what they're capable of doing. So I don't know, it's really interesting. Like even with the great whites, for example, when they add, I think it was like I can't remember what year the publication, but it was Ferreira, um, Tony Ferreira and team. They were looking at the cartilage in the jaw, and they actually add an extra 5 layers um, as they mature at around that exact same time that they start kind of incorporating mammals into their diet as well. So, and then that was where we found the base of the teeth to be a lot thicker. So before that point, they don't really have the capability of even kind of hunting the prey because to kind of immobilize, if we're talking about like pinnipeds, to immobilize that prey and be successful in predating, they kind of have to do it within a minute. So it's really that initial bite that is really, really important to be successful in their predation. And if they don't have that strong structure, their teeth are just going to be snapping off and breaking. So yeah, I don't know. It's so hard to kind of pinpoint what's most important. Like it just, back and forth between if it's morphology that's, driving everything because they wouldn't be able to hunt certain things without that particular, you know, um, dentition. But then, yeah, on the other side, it's like, well, their diet and, you know, environment really dictates what features they have as well. So, yeah, it's really cool to think about. Like you can go round and round in circles for days.
And you can also see sometimes that morphology, while it hinders something, it doesn't necessarily completely stop a behavior from happening.
Yeah.
Like there's
Mhm.
been reports of makos and I think even silky sharks hunting marine mammals, but at the
Yeah.
same time, they're clearly morphologically not built for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But who
Yeah.
knows if you give it a million or 2 years,
Yeah.
what happens?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially if they're in an environment and, there's like a surplus of pinnipeds or, whatever resources are really available. I'm sure we would see that shift over time. And it's interesting because I'm sure we will like, with the effects of climate change in, 50 years, we might be seeing these changes. So I don't know, it's really important to be able to study how things are actually going to be shifting. So we can, use evolution to be able to do that, to link it to how, everything's going to shift with climate change as well, and how diet is going to shift. So I don't know, it's really cool. And so much you can really do with it, so much work that can come out of it.
What's just crazy to think about too is that with how we affect the environment and say we cause a species to be critically endangered, like a a keystone species for an environment, then these animals that used to preyed upon those as their main food source, then they move on to other things. You're all of a sudden influencing the evolutionary balance with them and what directions they're going to wind up going, which is
Yeah.
something that you'll see like in real time. Maybe the morphology won't change, but the behavior will change. And then
Yeah.
that could lead to just like a whole domino effect with
Yeah, exactly.
evolution.
Yeah, that's where most of my research is kind of centered around that idea that what is going to happen when a certain prey isn't available. So mainly in the nutritional sense, because it's not just what's available, it's also the quality of prey. So metabolic demands are going to change with warmer water, and sharks are a great species, but like any migratory species, they have the ability to move and go into a new environment and find and like kind of supplement their diet with something that else that's available. But if you think about a benthic species that doesn't have the availability to do that, like what's going to happen to them with climate change if, there's a particular species that's really, really important nutritionally for them. If that species disappears, then they're not going to have anything to feed on, and then it goes up the food chain. So yeah, it's really like sharks are a great species to kind of be able to study this at a larger scale, and then we can go down to like the little um yeah, like in between species. But yeah, it's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, and the more specialized an animal is, the more successful it is in the environment and the ecology it's specialized in. But then once that specialty wears off, then those animals are the ones that are most susceptible towards extinction and things like that. Like when you look at lamniforms as a whole, they're very specialized compared to what you saw in the past in the fossil record. Whereas you see other groups like carcharias, they're very generalist oriented and they're doing comparatively better. They have way more species diversity, more niche diversity, I would say, as a whole. And then you have the lamniforms, which are almost all dwindling. And it's sad to see, but this, even before human intervention and everything like that, it was kind of going towards this trend. But just
Yeah.
the effects that we've done has really exacerbated the issues that they're facing. Which
Yeah,
also
definitely.
brings me to the one of my other questions with you is how does your research how does it like predict vulnerabilities and what does it tell you from like a conservation standpoint for sharks?
Yeah. Great question. So, with all the dietary stuff, we're looking at kind of what's really important nutritionally and what they're getting from it. So, we, often have this idea that everything's about energy maximization, and growth, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. And it really comes down to like the macronutrients, so like the protein, lipids, and like water content in marine prey. So it really fluctuates seasonally as well. So the sharks will actually target different prey depending on kind of what they're deficient in. So I don't know. The best way of kind of thinking about this is like an instinctual kind of drive that gives them these cues. So if you've been on like holidays and you've just been like eating pizza and junk food, and then you kind of get that feeling like you crave a salad or fruit, it's like a similar thing. And yeah, it's been demonstrated across a wide range of taxa, but it's just so hard to study in the marine environment. You can't just follow an animal around all day and track what it eats over and over and over. You're really relying on these one-off opportunistic samples where you can look at that diet, but it's only a snapshot of what they're eating at that time. But, really being able to piece together that story and understand why they're eating certain things at different times of the year and what they're getting from those prey items nutritionally, then we can understand how everything's going to shift with climate change and what they're going to be eating, if they're going to be taking more like risk-taking behavior, like, depredation is a huge issue, but it hasn't really been looked at from a nutritional standpoint. Um, so I don't know, it's really going to influence everything. Like sharks are going to be becoming, like we're already seeing changes in species distributions, but is this going to, increase more like human shark conflicts, more fisheries interactions with these species? So, yeah, I don't know. It's like it kind of encompasses all of those changes and then how we can actually help with their conservation in the long term because what we're trying to conserve right now, like those habitats that are really important for juveniles and adults, isn't necessarily what's going to be important in, 10, 20 years time. So it's really about predicting what's going to be important then. And not just, yeah, nutritionally, but in their habitat and that kind of thing as well. So that's where my research kind of aims to try and connect those things and all those interconnecting pathways. But this work in particular, it also has like quite a big like practical influence for things like shark bite forensics. Like you can use the interdental distance to kind of determine the species of shark and like an estimated size of the shark when there's been interactions on surfboards and that kind of thing. So I don't know, there's like a lot of different avenues you can go down, but in the broader conservation sense, it's more about, yeah, predicting changes with climate change.
And which group do you think is most susceptible to vulnerabilities, and what do you think the vulnerabilities would be between the ontogenetic stages? Do you see more disruptions in the adults, or do you see it more so in the juveniles?
Yeah, I mean, it's more so in the juveniles because they're in on the coast. But it's also hard because, the populations of those larger individuals are so much smaller as well. So it's hard to actually know. And, since their protection, we're obviously seeing these populations starting to come back. So it's hard to know like really a lot about those mature animals. Like we know in the broad sense where they fit ecologically and their function and what they're doing. But yeah, kind of being able to predict what's going to happen in the future is really difficult. But yeah, it's mainly those juveniles that are involved in these interactions if we're talking about white sharks. But then, if you look at a lot of the catch from fisheries, a lot of those longliners are catching makos and those oceanic white tips that are critically endangered. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say what is going to be most impacted. I think everything's going to be impacted. But yeah, certainly the juveniles tend to have the most interaction.
A big issue too is that a lot of sharks have very slow maturation rates, and then you pair that with having limited numbers of offspring.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like great whites are oophagous, so their offspring are going to consume each other, giving them very limited litters, and
Yeah.
that further just makes everything worse for them.
Yeah. And they don't reach maturation till I think it's like 3.6 meters for males and 4.8 for females. Like that's a big shark to be hitting, yeah, maturation to be able to reproduce. Like to get it to that point is like a long period of time. So yeah, it's hard to know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, it's been great having you on, Emily, and I'd like to add this last question for all guests, and that would be if you were to make any one discovery in your career, what do you think that discovery would be and why?
Oh, it would be really, really cool to kind of discover more of this kind of nutritional stuff in sharks. Like it's being documented. A great example um, is with, like, there's so many examples, but my supervisor was involved in this study looking at the endangered kakapo. And, their numbers were really dwindling, supplementary feeding wasn't really an option. And when you looked at the species diet, it came down to the actual nutrition of this remu berry. Um, and their diet was actually lacking in vitamin D and calcium, which was really, really important during their breeding for like the actual eggs of the birds, the offspring. So, you know, really being able to look at things from that really fine scale nutritional standpoint, it really shows that it drives everything. So to be able to, uncover something like that in sharks would be amazing and actually understand why they're eating certain things and what's driving their yeah, movements and dietary preferences would be
You have
really
a
cool.
specific tax in mind or just great whites all the
Oh,
way?
anything. I'll take any shark, not specific. I'm currently working on short fin makos mainly for the dietary stuff, so it'd be really cool. Yeah, to learn more about those. It's been their diet's been really not what I expected on the East Coast. Like, we think of them as this pelagic species, and like there's obviously been a lot of dietary studies on them before. But yeah, on the East Coast, I've it's all been these inshore estuarine species mainly, like yeah, really shallow water coastal fish species that I found in the stomachs. So yeah, it's really baffled me. It's really interesting. So yeah, hopefully we can find something there. It would be really cool. Like if might be they're coming in shorter feed as they're heading up the East Coast. Who knows? But yeah, really, really cool.
Another crazy one too is with even juvenile great whites, how they can actually be found in brackish water, which is
Yeah. It's
that's crazy to
crazy.
think about.
Mm. That they have, yeah, that physiology to be able to do that is insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great having you on, Emily. And for those that have watched this full episode, you are definitely a shark nerd. So please like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new Elasmocast episode.